identify politically. Whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, or none of the above, this is our time to stand up for what we know in our hearts is right.
Here's where the race for president stands right now. Kamala Harris is currently leading in the national polls, up by a few percentage points over Donald Trump. And if you look at the 7 key battleground states, Harris is leading in 6 out of 7, all but Georgia. We also know that Harris currently holds a cash advantage after outraising Donald Trump last month. So, will this pivotal week help boost the Harris campaign? Welcome to The Big Deal. I'm Errol Louis, national political anchor at Spectrum News. Every week, we look at some of the biggest issues shaping our nation and the road to the White House. The Democratic National Convention wrapped up this week, with Kamala Harris taking the stage to formally accept the Democratic Party's presidential nomination. With both conventions now officially over, Republicans and Democrats are kicking into high gear. We're going to bring you full analysis of the race for president tonight and of the Democratic National Convention, this week's Big Deal.
Our nation with this election has a precious, fleeting opportunity to move past the bitterness, cynicism, and divisive battles of the past, a chance to chart a new way forward.
Joining me now to talk more about all of this are 2 of the top political analysts in America. They've both been covering the convention with me all week. Alex Cohen is a political anchor at Spectrum News 1 in Southern California. Curtis Jackson is a political anchor for Spectrum News 1 in Ohio. And Curtis, Democratic delegates approved a 92-page party platform this week. It was on the first night, as a matter of fact, and the document was more or less complete back when President Biden was in the race. We're still looking through that document for the details, but what can you tell us so far about Harris's Democratic Party and campaign will be different from what President Biden was planning?
It definitely goes further than what the Biden administration had put out in terms of what their policy priorities were going to be for 2024 and beyond. I think certainly when you start to look at issues like medical debt and having some sort of forgiveness for medical debt, that is definitely, I won't say a bridge too far for the Biden administration, but certainly further than what they were willing to go, although they have talked about it. And there's also the issues that are related to improving affordable housing and housing access, the $25,000 tax benefit for those who are buying homes for the first time. That is certainly a very significant step forward from where the Biden administration was during its first term. That all being said, there are a lot of things in the platform that are very familiar, whether you're talking about lowering the cost of prescription drugs, which of course both Harris and Biden got together just before the convention to tout, and then also continuing with middle-class tax cuts that are set to expire in 2025. They want to see those not only put back or restored, but also perhaps even advanced even further.
Okay, and now, Alex, let's listen to part of Harris's big speech where she talks about the dangers of a second Trump term.
Just imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails, and how he would use the immense powers of the presidency of the United States, not to improve your life, not to strengthen our national security, but to serve the only client he has ever had, himself.
Now, that almost sounded like a trial lawyer making the case to a jury. And I remember hearing you observe that actually sort of speaks to the production values at the Democratic National Convention compared to their Republican counterparts at their convention. Both conventions were big spectacles, but there were some visual differences, and you say that really ties into the substance of where Kamala Harris is coming from.
Absolutely, Errol. I mean, if you can cast your mind back to the Republican National Convention, when Donald Trump gave his big speech, he was in front of what looked like the White House. He looked incredibly presidential. It's why you hear people all the time in the media calling him President Trump, even though he's no longer the president, right? You get that image baked into your mind. And I remember seeing that thinking at the time, what are they going to do for President Biden if they already showed Trump in front of the White House? Now, of course, it was Kamala Harris. And I think it was a very smart move by the convention producers to all that wood paneling, seeing her there in front of the podium and given her cadence and what we know she's done for so many years as a prosecutor. She came off incredibly lawyerly, which really put her in that position to make the case against her opponent.
Okay, so now, Curtis, let's talk about the running mate. On night 3, the vice presidential nominee, Tim Walz, had a chance to reintroduce himself to the party. Let's listen to that.
I had 24 kids in my high school class, and none of them went to Yale. But I'll tell you what, growing up in a small town like that, you learn how to take care of each other. That family down the road, they may not think like you do. They may not pray like you do. They may not love like you do, but they're your neighbors.
Okay, so Walz is from a small town. He beat up on Yale, the Ivy League school. Does that actually win over voters, do you think?
Didn't win over my wife so much. She's a Yale law grad. Anyway, she joked about that, by the way. I don't think it's going to hurt too much. I think it's just a little jab more advanced than it is the so-called coastal elites. But definitely, we're seeing from middle-class Joe in Joe Biden. Now we're going to small-town Tim. I think that does resonate with a significant portion of the Democratic voters that have been lost to the Republican Party over the last several election cycles. And there's always been that push, or idea, question, how are we going to get those voters back? The Democratic Party has been asking this for a very, very long time. They certainly have tried it under the Biden administration with policy. When you look at where all of the money is going, for example, when it comes to the Inflation Reduction Act, or the CHIPS and Science Act, for that matter, here in Ohio, that money is funding the huge Intel plant that is now being built in Licking County. That's a rural area. So they have tried their best to target resources towards rural America in hopes of luring some of those voters back. Mm-hmm. I think what they have missed and what they now have is somebody who speaks their language and somebody that they can identify with. Okay,
and now, Alex, on the first night, President Biden was there and he formally passed the torch to Harris, insisting that his speech was not a goodbye.
Kamala and Tim understand that this nation must continue to be a place of possibilities, not just for the few of us, but for all of us. So join me in promising your whole heart to this effort, and where my heart will be. I promise I'll be the best volunteer Harris and Walz has ever seen.
Okay, it's nice to say, of course, Alex, but what will Biden's role really be? Is he really going to hit the campaign trail, do you think?
I don't know if he'll necessarily hit the campaign trail. I think we can expect, because look, we live in a world of clips, right? There's a lot that he could do, even chilling at the Santa Barbara Vineyard that he's been at this week following his appearance in Chicago. But look, Biden can pretty much do anything right now. He's got tremendous political capital given the very difficult decision he made. He still has several months left in his presidency, and I think it'll be really interesting to see what key choices might he make in those months, knowing it caps off a tremendously lengthy career, and one that right now is on a high note for making that difficult, but many saw it as necessary decision.
Okay, let's pause right there. We're going to talk more about how the Democratic National Convention changes the race for president and for other races. I'll be joined by our panel of Spectrum News political experts after this short break. Stay with us. We're back with The Big Deal with more analysis of the Democratic National Convention. Here's where the race for president stands right now. Kamala Harris is currently leading in the national polls, up by a few percentage points over Donald Trump. And if you look at the 7 key battleground states, Harris is leading in 6 out of 7, all but Georgia. We also know that Harris currently holds a cash advantage after outraising Donald Trump last month. So will this pivotal week help boost the Harris campaign, or will the race tighten up again? Spectrum News political anchors Alex Cohen and Curtis Jackson are still with me, and joining us is political anchor Susan Arbetter, joining us from Albany, New York. And Susan, normally party leaders lay low while their adversaries are holding their convention, but Donald Trump and J.D. Vance tried a different approach by so-called counterprogramming. Here's what Trump said about the convention this week.
You know, they always say, sure, please stick to policy, don't get personal. And yet they're getting personal all night long, these people. Do I still have to stick to policy?
So that's a little bit of what it sounded like, Susan. What did Trump and Vance end up doing, and how well did it work?
So as you suggested, Errol, there was no lying low. Just start with last night during Kamala Harris's acceptance speech. Trump was on Truth Social taking shots at her as well as the president. At one point, he tweeted, "Where's Hunter?" in reference to Joe Biden's son. He also called Harris a radical Marxist and comrade Kamala, and falsely stated that Democrats wanted Roe to end and be sent back to the states. But throughout the week, both Trump and Vance stumped in swing states, including Michigan, North Carolina, and Arizona, on issues that many voters perceive to be weak spots for Democrats. For example, on Tuesday in Michigan, Trump attacked Harris's record on crime and safety, and on. And today he was at the border in Arizona.
Okay, so now, Curtis, 2 of the speeches that really got a lot of attention during this convention were when the Obamas spoke on Tuesday.
I don't care how you identify politically, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, or none of the above. This is our time to stand up for what we know in our hearts is right.
We do not need 4 more years of bluster and bumbling and chaos. We have seen that movie before, and we all know that the sequel is usually worse.
Now, how much of that was personal, Curtis? It almost seemed like they had a score to settle with Donald Trump.
You know, it was shades of that Washington Correspondents' Dinner where Obama mocked Trump, and then that was supposedly one of the reasons that Trump decided to run. And then it was just plain old shade. I think they were throwing a little bit, but I think it had a purpose to it, and that is to remind people that while history does not repeat itself, it does often rhyme. And the same attacks that were deployed by former President Donald Trump before he was in public office against then President Obama had to deal a lot with the birtherism issue and questionings of racial identity and belongingness to America. So I think that, yes, there was an answer to this that was for them personal, but it had a political message, which was, we've seen this before. We need to do something to make sure it doesn't continue.
Okay. Now, Alex, we had some breaking news today. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has suspended his campaign and endorsed Donald Trump. Kennedy was not polling well, but the Democrats did put out a message inviting his supporters to come on board. What's the latest? What's going on there?
Oh, there's a whole lot here, Errol. He is suspending his campaign, not ending it. And he actually invited voters who are not in swing states, like here in California, saying, still vote for me. Let's make a point here. Interesting to note, although Kamala Harris's campaign has invited his supporters to come vote for her, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said today that he tried to reach out to Kamala Harris's team to see if there might be some role for him, and they refused to accept the meeting. That has created a certain bit of buzz on social media. Also very interesting to note that shortly after RFK Jr. held this conference, relatives of the candidate, 5 of his siblings, came out with a statement doubling down on they didn't support him, they never supported him, that they choose joy and hope, and they are aligning with Kamala Harris. So in the end, it's going to be really interesting to see see where those RFK supporters wind up. Tough to tell.
Okay. And then, Susan, the convention included a number of Republican officials, including former members of Congress, a former lieutenant governor, and many others. What's the thinking there? What's the idea behind that strategy?
I think that by treating MAGA as a kind of cult or perhaps even an addiction, the Democrats have been able to claim the allegiance of people who have escaped the cult or who have kicked the addiction, and also treat them as a sort of occupying a moral high ground. They did that with Adam Kinzinger. They did that with Stephanie Grisham and with several former MAGA voters.
Okay. Thanks very much for that, Susan. Thanks to all of you. We're going to take a break now, and when we come back, we'll take a look at some key dates for the campaigns as Election Day approaches. Stay with us. Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, and click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.